Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar. Today, I'm really excited to introduce to you Noah Barnett. He is the Director of Partnerships and Community at Virtuous. And if you're not familiar with Virtuous, they are the responsive nonprofit CRM and fundraising platform. And that's exactly what Noah's going to talk to you about today, is being more responsive in your fundraising and how that can boost your fundraising efforts. So I'm very excited to have him talk to you and have him share his knowledge with you. One just bit of housekeeping is if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A box and we'll get to them at the end. Otherwise, sit back and enjoy Noah's presentation. Thank you.
Hey, Josh, I really appreciate the intro, and thanks everyone for taking time out of their day to join us for today's presentation. And so we want to keep this interactive. So if you do have any questions, feel free to use the questions pane as we go through, and we'll definitely stop and address those. As fundraisers today, we're dealing with a lot of collisions amongst a variety of dimensions of things going on. Whether it's the declining number of donors actually giving to charities, whether it's the increasing competition of the number of charities actually vying for your donors' share of wallet or just attention. But then on top of that, the growing numbers of fundraisers actually opting out of our profession. And so we kind of have this interesting cocktail going on right now. And it's really difficult for nonprofits to navigate how to respond to that. And so what we've done is we've done some research that's going to kind of help identify some of these key threads and showcase the growing gap between today's donor and today's nonprofit. But we're not going to stop there. Through our research, we've actually developed a framework that we believe will help you as an organization navigate some of these challenges and really decrease the distance between your donors and the good, which ultimately is going to help you raise retention rates and grow giving. So here's a little map of where we're headed during today's conversation. We're going to start by kind of unpacking these three elements, which we believe is causing kind of a generosity crisis. Then we're going to walk back and talk about today's donor and say, what did they actually want from your nonprofit? And then we're going to share kind of a playbook that you can leverage to really engage with today's donor and build lasting relationships. And we're going to start by identifying 3 approaches to donor segmentation, which is key to success today. And then walk back and provide some practical and pragmatic strategies that you can use to cultivate stronger relationships with your donor. And then, of course, we'll leave time at the end for Q&A so that you can practically share some of the challenges maybe you and your organization are having so that we can address those and provide some more contextual insights. So I want to be respectful of your time because your time is so valuable. So please make sure you use the questions pane to share things that are important to you so that we can make the best use of this time together as we kind of navigate the conversation. But before we dive in, because you're going to spend, the next 45 minutes, 60 minutes with me, I feel like it's important for me to introduce myself. So my name is Noah Barnett, as Josh shared. And first and foremost, I'm a husband and father of the 3 sons. These are my 3 boys. And just to give a glimpse of my personality, I'm most like the child on the far left. And ironically, his name is also Noah. I've spent 7 years running growth and fundraising at various nonprofits. And so that really focused in on how do we maximize a donor's relationship with our organization over a lifetime. And so looking deep into how do we acquire the right donors? How do we retain donors? But then how do we cultivate a relationship with them so that we can have or help them express more of how they want to invest their resources to change our world. And have since actually moved away from working in nonprofits to spending most of my time here at Virtuous, building relationships with organizations like Journey and 5Q and others, but also thinking critically about how we serve and add value to the generosity ecosystem. And that includes research like I'm going to share today. And so, just a little background on Virtuous before we dive in. We believe strongly that we are the responsive nonprofits growth partner. We live in a world that's complex, and because things are changing so quickly, you don't need another vendor or a technology platform. You really need a partner. And we do that in three ways. We equip nonprofits with an integrated CRM, communications, and giving platform. So, the technology side of that, because that's so essential for success today, but also a modern fundraising playbook really designed to build relationships with today's donor, which is what we're going to be sharing today. And this is just hitting the surface. We're actually releasing a book next month that unpacks this in full detail. And so if you're interested in that, feel free to let me know in the comments, and I'll follow up with you via email and actually send you a free copy. So feel free to drop that in, and I'll make sure I send you a copy of that book when it comes out next month. In addition to that, we actually provide hands-on support and ongoing insights delivered by real people who really deeply care about your success, because we know that we're in a people business, and together is how we're going to help grow generosity in our world and help your organization meet your goals. We do this in a variety of different ways. If you're interested in more of learning about Virtuous, you can let me know in the comments section, and I'll be happy to follow up with you. Work with a ton of incredible organizations across a variety of verticals and different types of causes. So as I mentioned, we're kind of in this point where there's a lot of collisions of challenges that you as a fundraiser or a nonprofit leader have to address. And it really starts with this reality that today's nonprofits really struggle to retain and cultivate today's donor. On average, nonprofits lose more than half of their donors and 76% of their new donors, according to the Fundraising Effectiveness Project. And the other thing that's alarming, that's almost disguised because the amount of giving has actually increased over the last 10 years, is that we've seen an 18 to 25% drop in the number of people actually giving to charitable organizations, which isn't problematic directly, and you might not be feeling this, but the challenge is that as we've seen an increase in the amount of competition and an increase in the demand on attention and the number of donors opting out, the only thing actually covering this up, which would make it more problematic for you and your organization, is that major donors continue to give because we're in an economic boom and they're giving more and more. But as soon as what we see is that when we hit another economic downturn and giving drops from the top 5, 10% of givers, there's gonna be a huge problem for organizations maybe like yours. And the challenge is that without a sustainable number of donors giving to your organization and a high dependency on major donors, we're exposing our organizations, and you might be in this seat as well, to huge risk and the ability to actually not be able to accomplish the work that we're doing and set out to do. And so this huge drop in low to mid tier donors in the last decade is a huge problem for the longevity of your organization, but ultimately the generosity ecosystem overall. And so one thing that we found, and we're going to unpack this statement, but is that the fundraising models that drive most nonprofits today were actually designed for a donor that no longer exists. So as donors have shifted, our old traditional fundraising models are actually ill-equipped to engage, attract, and ultimately retain and keep those donors engaged with your organization, which I think, and we believe and have seen in our research, is why we're seeing this huge drop off of donors opting out. And so we're going to unpack some of the changes we're seeing with today's donors, why we believe this is the case, and then we're going to come back and provide some practical insights on ways that you can address these challenges. So there's three fundamental shifts going on in our world right now that are external from nonprofits, but they're kind of macro shifts that are really impacting the work that we do as nonprofit leaders and fundraisers. One is that access to information has been democratized, which has shifted power from institutions to individuals. Technology is also transforming all aspects of our lives, especially how we connect with people and brands and the causes we care deeply with. And attention is quite fractured. There's no kind of major water holes now, but we actually have 100,000 water holes that are medium sized. And with attention fractured and actually distributed across a variety of micro moments throughout a day and endless distractions competing for our time, this results in a really challenging and noisy environment for your organization to stand out in. And so we know technology has drastically changed how your donors communicate, connect, and learn. Today's donors are hyper connected and rely on recommendations by friends. They want to be a part of your causes, not just an ATM. Transactional fundraising just fundamentally doesn't work in today's environment. And they expect personalized experiences across all areas of their lives. And we see this is only going to increase in 2020 and beyond. Personalization is everywhere. How we listen to music, how we shop at the grocery store, my Starbucks order, when we travel to theme parks or places like Disney, how we acquire clothing is curated and personalized specifically for us across a variety of different things that we interact with on a regular basis. And this has created an expectation of personalization and a discomfort with generic. And so this has really shaped how donors' expectations have evolved. And even though these are being driven by things outside of charitable organizations, it's impacting what their expectation is as they contribute to your organization or other charities. That experience or the framing of that experience is still desired in all aspects of their lives because it feels normal. The fact that I can order something from Amazon and receive it in 3 hours, that feedback loop is much shorter. Whereas in a typical charitable giving situation, I give $25 or 100 or 250 or 1,000, and I may never hear back on when that happens. And I think that's just unacceptable. So kind of the expectation is driving what you as an organization really need to do as well. And so I want to give you kind of an example of this. So I recently purchased a van, and I was hesitant. I didn't want to purchase a van, but because I have these 3 boys and a growing family, I also have a golden doodle. I was like, we need something to actually move all of these children around and all of their things. And so I knew I wanted to buy a van. I knew what van I wanted to buy because I had done research and looked up reviews and really understood, like, what do people like? What do people not like? What's a priority to me? And I never talked to a car company. I was able to do all that research and pull in all that insight and even discover the type of vehicle that I wanted to buy strictly because I reached out to friends and families or reached out on the internet to people that were in a similar situation as me. And the thing here is that when we talk about the power has shifted between institutions and individuals, is that historically, if you wanted to buy a vehicle, you had to go engage with various car dealers and ask them questions and test drive it. Now you can have so much more information before you ever even let a car dealer know that you're interested in the vehicle. And so in one day, I decided what car I wanted. I went to the dealer. I said, I want to buy this car, and I bought it same day. And the interesting thing here is that the story doesn't stop there. So I financed the vehicle through the dealership because they gave the best rates, and sold them my other car and paid off my other loan. And so 5 days later, my local credit union, which I bank with and had financed my previous car, gives me a call. And they say, hey, we noticed that you recently paid off your car. Congratulations. Did you sell the vehicle? And I said, yes, I did. They're like, that's awesome. Congratulations. We know how difficult that is. did you purchase a new vehicle? And I said, yeah, I absolutely did. And they said, well, would you be open to the opportunity for us to or to suggest financing rates that we could do for you as a valued customer that might be better than what you currently have? And I was like, sure, absolutely. There's no harm to me. It's very contextual. It's very personalized. And they were able to come back and cut my rate by like 0.5% or 1%. I couldn't remember. And either way, I would prefer to bank with them because, I value them. And the lesson here isn't that my buying experience of a van, but it's really in the response by an organization that have adopted different strategies to be able to engage with today's consumer. It's not me coming to my bank asking them to say, hey, what financing rates do you have? But they listened to my behavior, monitored my actions, and then connected with me in a personal way at the right time with the right suggestions. And that's what earned them my business. And this is a very local credit union, but they've seen how these shifts have changed and have adopted their approaches to engaging with their customers. And I think there's a lot to learn here as we think about fundraising or engaging with today's donors. And we'll kind of bring this back as we dig through the rest of the content. And so when we think about this, is the reason people actually stop giving is typically due to two things. One is a lack of confidence, and two is a lack of connection. And ironically, when donors continue to give, it's because they have a connection and they have confidence. And so when we look at the depressing stats that, we're sub 50% on retaining donors, we have to understand that the reason we're losing the majority of our donors is because they don't have confidence or they don't have a connection with us. And so as we think about our fundraising strategies, we're going to need to incorporate that knowledge into how we refine and revise our approach for today's donor. So discovery number one through our research was that today's donor expects a personal connection to the causes they care most about, and they typically stop giving to an organization when it lacks connection and confidence. And number two is, even in light of this, today's nonprofit is really handcuffed to an outdated fundraising tactics that really reserve this approach for a select few and really rely on impersonal, relatively unresponsive tactics that bundle the majority of donors in mass. So you might feel like this is familiar in how you actually structure your fundraising. We have a very few receive a personal touch. Maybe that's with major donor reps or one-on-one meetings. And even if they're giving 60, 70% of your total revenue, you're really only focused in on maybe 5 to 15% of your donors and providing them personal connection and reinstilling confidence within them on a regular basis. And the rest receive impersonal mass blast spray style tactics. And I think the interesting thing is that our fundraising tactics are actually pushing donors away because we're not being responsive to the new expectations that donors have. And so our hypothesis is that you really need a refreshed approach to fundraising. And this is kind of what we're going to be focused in on the rest of our time. We're going to spend the next 25 minutes really unpacking this and getting super practical. So if you're a practical and pragmatic fundraiser, which I know nonprofit leaders have to be, this is where we're going next. And I think what's important, though, is that if we started here, we would miss the underlying foundation as to why a refreshed approach is needed. So now that we understand that we do have a problem and that some of the challenges that we have are actually instilled in our current fundraising tactics, we want to propose a new approach. And so we've developed a framework and a methodology called responsive fundraising. And like I mentioned, if you're interested in this or have any interest in receiving a free copy of our book that's coming out next month, it's going to be a physical book, feel free to drop your email or note in the comments field, and I'll be happily send you a complimentary copy when it comes out next month. But responsive fundraising is a response to our traditional tactics and saying, how would we actually redesign our fundraising approach if we were designing it for today's donor, knowing they're looking for connection and confidence. And so the responsive fundraising methodology really puts your donor at the center of fundraising. This has been socialized as something called like donor centric or, relationship fundraising. There's other words to that, but I think what missed in some of those tactics that have already been discussed is that they didn't provide an ongoing methodology that reorients not only your fundraising tactics, maybe in the annual giving bucket or the major giving bucket, but this is a reorienting the entire posture that your fundraising takes towards your donors and even starts to begin to impact things like strategy, culture, et cetera, how we structure teams, and ultimately, in the long run, how we actually design our organizations to serve today's donor so that we can accomplish the work that's important and to serve our world. So the responsive fundraising framework really puts the donor at the center of fundraising. It seeks to treat all donors like major donors, and it's personalized cycles, not impersonal funnels or mountains. So instead of this effort where it says we have this process that we want to push donors through, it disengages with that traditional approach and says we're actually going to create a circular approach that continually listens to donors for donor signals. We're going to talk about what that means, connecting personally with that donor, and then suggesting personal giving options. And that could be financial, that could be other next steps, other ways that they can leverage their influence and kind of social passions to actually further the cause as well. And these cycles continual, and they're much more dynamic than kind of a traditional fixed stewardship model. And so it's focusing on listening to the donor, listening for donor signals. These are proactive donor signals, but also things that you know about the donor, connecting with them personally, and then suggesting personally. And this repeats itself over and over and over again as you begin to create that lasting relationship with the donor. So I want to take a minute to kind of pause here because I do think there was some questions that have already surfaced. And so I want to kind of take a look at those and see. It looks like actually everyone just wants the book, which is great. I'll definitely be sending the book to all of you. So I really appreciate that. So let's keep going. If there's questions, feel free to use the Q&A pane. I want to make sure this is interactive and really valuable to you. But let me continue to unpack this and get more in the weeds on this. So the first thing and the most important thing as part of the responsive fundraising methodology is the idea of listening. Ironically, in a world that's filled with ever-growing noise, we believe the strategy isn't to push through or stand above, but to actually circumvent that. And we believe the best way to do that is to actually start by listening. And that enables you to actually foster kind of this genuine conversation and create personalized engagement with every donor. So we're going to talk about 3 types of donor signals your nonprofit should be listening for, and some practical ways that you would leverage that to connect more personally with donors based on those signals. So your donors, when you look at your donor profile, is kind of this eclectic array of account numbers or donor profile numbers or annual giving numbers. But the thing that's so important, and we need to remind ourselves often, is that behind all of those numbers, behind that profile, are real people. And regardless of what you think you know about them, it's still important to start by saying this is a real person. So even though account number 369 and 742 are mirrored in their activity, the people behind those are different. So when we're listening for donor signals, we're trying to take a pool or a sea of account numbers and actually begin to bring to life and color in the image of what those donors' involvement with your organization or the cause that you're working on is, the interest they have in various aspects of your organization, or interest in the types of things they want to do with your organization. But also, and almost more importantly, is the intent. So let's unpack these. There's 3 things. You want to look for involvement, listen for involvement, listen for interest, and listen for intent. And that's going to allow you to color in a broader picture of your donors so that you can connect more personally with them. And this is exactly what organizations like Netflix, Starbucks, Spotify, Amazon, Disney, Nike, Stitch Fix, and so many others are actually leveraging. Even my local bank, they're monitoring, listening, and then making personalized connection. So the first segmentation strategy is segment by involvement. So all giving is personal. However, segmentation by involvement frequency and giving levels can help you pinpoint your message to serve donors better. And so if anything I'm saying feels like, well, I've heard all this before, you're exactly right. Segmenting by involvement has been something we've been doing forever. I think it's worth resurfacing as part of our responsive fundraising methodology because it's so essential to differentiate donors by what they've actually told you or how they've engaged with your cause. So this is first party involvement. It's not thinking about how they've given to other charities like yours, or they attended an event, or they've done this or done that. It's very looking at like, what have they actually told you through their actions that you could leverage to connect with them more personally. So things like how you communicate with a donor versus a non-donor, very different. How you connect with first-time donors versus return donors should be very different. And this is strictly reminders of how you build deeper relationships and bridge that level to connection and confidence, is because you're acknowledging and saying, we know what you've done. And we're going to take that into consideration when we engage with you. So letters that say, hey, we want you to be involved in this. If you've given already, thank you so much. If you haven't, go donate here, again, falls in that mass category. And that's not something that's directed towards me and acknowledging me and saying, I know you. What's different is you could say, I know that you supported our organization in December to help us fund the ability to serve 250 new children in our local Phoenix area. Now we're implementing those efforts and seeing that we have the ability to scale that to 1,000 donors, and we want you to be a part of that. That's different than saying, hey, we're doing this new thing. If you've given, great. If not, do something else. This is something I think nonprofits understand and are beginning to implement. And I would love to hear, how do you leverage this? How do you segment your donors by involvement today? I would love to hear how you're leveraging this type of segmentation in your fundraising today. So I'm going to push on, but I would love, just drop that in the questions pane. How do you segment different? How do you differentiate your message between donors that have different type of involvement with your organization? While you guys are thinking through that and sharing that, I'm kind of walk through the other two, which I think are kind of leveling up and beginning to paint that better, bigger, more personalized visual of who these donors are. And so we're diving deeper into segmentation. So the second way to segment as part of the methodology is segmenting by interest. So each of your donors give first because they care, and you should use this to provide more contextual suggestions to donors on how they can get involved with your fundraising campaigns. So it's not just, are they a major donor? Are they a first-time donor? Did they give last year? Did they not? It's more of, they support this very specific program, or they support this very specific program, or they're interested in these types of giving activities. And so we're segmenting based on those. And that again is allowing us to showcase that they're known, and we're beginning where they are and bridging the gap between where they are back to where we would hope and suggest them to go. The third way to segment is by intent. And so this really goes beyond your traditional RFM analysis and giving history, and really seeks to understand why a donor cares, and then groups donors by motivation. This really lets you hyper personalize your message to mirror the donor's motivation, which again bridges that level of connection and confidence because you're expressing to them that you see them and know them. And I'll give you kind of a few examples here. One from my personal experience. So we had a group of regular supporters, so recurring donors, and they were giving to us in small increments over a long period of time. And we were trying to reorient our message to better understand how we could get them to deepen their commitment to the program. So how could they increase their giving? But also, how do we retain donors longer? And so we did a bunch of boardroom work where you're like, this is what we think donors give, this is why we think, this is how we should structure the message. But at the end of the day, we stopped and reminded ourselves that until we ask the question and listen to the actual supporters' feedbacks, we're not going to ever get a full picture of what this looks like. So we ran a survey and we actually had 1,000 people respond and tell us very simply, why did you get involved with this program? And why do you give? Like, why was this important to you? Very open ended. And we were able to group those into a bunch of different categories, which enabled us to segment groups by intent. And so this was a child development organization that did international relief work. And we found that even though a supporter's involvement and interest were identical, their intents varied greatly. So, for example, we had supporters that supported this program because they believed that child education was the way to eradicate poverty. And so they were invested in this program because of their belief in the value of education, especially for children. Much more of a like macro level view, education is the solution. We had another group of people that actually supported our program because they leveraged it to educate their children on the the differences that children experience, and the fact that the world is bigger than the local community, and that there's a bigger world out there, and there's children that have different benefits or live in different conditions than the ones that they did. So they used it as an education tool actually for their family. So it was a family values intent in like a development play. Whereas then we had another group of people that fell into two different categories, but there was a similar intent there that we felt like we could group together, is that they actually supported our programs because they either couldn't have children, so they were unable to have children, or they were people that didn't plan on having children, but highly valued children and wanted to invest in other children's well-being and benefit. And so, as an extension of their personal values, they were saying, we don't have children, but we want to invest in children. The other group was that they had children, but now they were empty nesters. And so, again, they're extending their care and support for children externally out of the home to other individuals' children. And so, these three buckets, even though their involvement and interest were very similar, their intent was drastically similar or drastically different. And we were able to leverage this insight into being able to better segment how we communicate. And we ran a campaign that was basically like why you should support this effort. And we actually highlighted stories from each of these different individuals so that we could showcase and appeal to a variety of intents that would drive someone to support our programs. And it was highly successful. So that's kind of a personal experience. Another way this plays out is that, let's say you're an animal charity and the involvement and interest is the same. They want to support, the well-being and care of animals. But you may have someone that's a lifelong animal activist who believes in equal rights for animals in some capacity, or believes that we should protect them and they should have similar rights to how we serve and protect other humans. Or they could be a lifelong vegan where they've infused this into their lifestyle. So it's a lifestyle kind of deep ingrained belief system decision. Whereas you might have another group that actually supports animal charities because animals have been a huge part of their lives and actually enhanced their lives. And so they feel like they're a value contributor to the overall kind of flourishing of their lives. And so this segment is very different, and how you would communicate or appeal or connect to those individuals or even showcase or close the loop for those groups, very different. Another one is a university or a school or an arts organization. You might have people that actually support the arts organization because they just value the arts and they support a lot of or arts organizations. You might have someone that actually supports because they're a beneficiary of the arts programs. Or you might have someone that doesn't benefit from it, but they just believe in investing in organizations within their community that helps grow the overall lifestyle value of the community. And again, someone that benefits from your programs versus someone that's trying to enhance the community versus someone that just believes that the arts are important more globally and may not even live in your local community. The intent, very different. And so this segmentation by intent, I think is the hardest, but the most beneficial because it allows you to create donor identities, customize messaging, and convey to individuals that they're known and seen in a way that I have not seen fundraisers leveraging. And I think this is a key part of how we can be a responsive fundraiser. So the first step of responsive fundraising is listening. And so now we're going to talk about the next steps. Like, what else can you do? What are ways that you can use responsive fundraising within your donor cultivation strategies? So the first responsive cultivation strategy is something we call maximize momentum. So after someone makes a donation to your fundraising campaign, it's really important that you begin cultivating them immediately. We've seen proof of through data that the quicker you are able to follow up and respond to a donor, the more likely they are to give again. And so it's important that you begin this immediately. And luckily, technology and kind of modern technology systems have become accessible so that you can provide this type of experience. And so this can look like this can be implemented in a few different ways. First and foremost, it could be that after someone makes a donation through your website, you actually immediately follow up with them on the next page and provide them a visual into the impact that their donation is going to provide. So if they gave to provide child welfare, or they gave to provide rescuing for animals, you can then follow up immediately and close the loop and say, this is what you're a part of, and kind of celebrate the impact that they've made. In addition to that, you can give them options for next steps. They're already engaged. And because attention is so fractured and the competition is so fierce, once someone's given you their intention, it's important to maintain that momentum. And that's really part of the responsive cultivation is, how do you bridge the gap? What is the next likely step? How can you encourage them and provide suggestions on what they can do next? Over and above that, once they've gone through the giving experience, whether this is online or even at an event, it's important to continue to follow up with them immediately. And whether that's through email or mail or phone call, there's a lot of different channels that you can leverage to communicate with today's donor. And I think leveraging more is something that we would encourage fundraisers to do. But at the minimum, what's really important is following up by providing communication that initiates because they did something. So it's dynamic, that it's a response to what they did, not your monthly communication that you send out on a regular basis to everybody. So it's very different, where you're setting up communication that's actually a response that's building momentum from an action a donor's taken. This could be that they gave a gift, it could be their first gift, it could be their fifth gift. Maybe you would cultivate those people differently. Maybe they attended an event. Maybe they signed up for your email newsletter. Maybe they visited your website and engaged with some content that you provide or an educational training. The idea is that whatever they did, you're building a dynamic campaign that's acknowledging what they did because you're listening, and then connecting with them personally, and then suggesting the most logical next steps that they could take based on the action that they took and what you historically know about them. Maximizing momentum is a key part of responsive fundraising. So this is a quote from GuideStar. It says, only 52% of charities thank a donor within 48 hours of their gift. Yet first-time donors who receive a personal thank you within 48 hours are 4 times more likely to give again. So if you do nothing else, thank donors within 48 hours and make sure it's more than just sending them a receipt. just that is going to differentiate and help you increase your new donor conversion. I think what you can then do is begin to leverage the other segmentation strategies to actually branch off further, so that you're not just saying thank you generically to every donor, but if it's their sixth donation, you're acknowledging their investment in your organization. Or if they gave to program A versus program B, you're acknowledging that and showing them the impact that their support to that program is going to have, and then making contextual suggestions on what they can do next. The complexity, it can expand, which I think there's increasing value as you expand the complexity of how you think about these strategies. But you can also keep it simple and just start with something as simple as differentiating your thank you strategy between a first-time donor and a donor who's given to your organization previously. The second cultivation strategy is something called dynamic versus fixed nurturing. Um, so really it's this idea of you're reorienting your cultivation to focus less on kind of your drop dates and more on each individual donor's journey. So historically, we have this approach in traditional fundraising that says, we're going to send out 12 communications a year. Maybe we send 6 appeals, maybe you send 18. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that it's on a schedule that you've predefined and that you're initiating based on the intent the organization has and the desire you have versus the response to donor behavior. So this idea of responsive fundraising really doesn't say you shouldn't do any of that. But where we see the true value is actually reorienting some of your fundraising campaigns to actually be dynamic based on donor behavior. So for example, if you have let's say your annual fund, we'll keep it simple. If someone gives to your annual fund, what happens next? Or if someone gave to your annual fund before and they haven't given this year based on their 12-year, kicking off a campaign to engage that specific donor because of their previous history is more of a dynamic campaign than a fixed campaign. In addition, you might have someone that visits your website and reviews the new campaign video you've created for your capital campaign. But you know that they've done that and they haven't supported the campaign. And so kicking off a campaign based on that activity that continually runs. So it's not just happening for, let's say, Michelle, who comes to your website. But if Michelle, John, Doug, and Mike come to your website that day or tomorrow, that campaign's kicking off. This is the difference between a fixed campaign and a dynamic campaign. And being able to run dynamic campaigns that are based on the donor signals is a key part of responsive fundraising. And again, the complexity here can get really out of control, but you can also just keep it simple. And so a great example of this is something that Journity offers, for example, is that if someone comes to your website and they're not signed up for your email address, asking them to sign up for your email or your email list is a perfect ask. It's contextual and it's running all the time. Or if someone's highly engaged with a specific category of content that you speak about on your website, presenting them an offer to support the ongoing program and development of that education is a great first step. And that's something Journity does a great job at. But taking it a step further, and something we at Virtuous help a lot of customers do, is being able to engage donors through a 2-week campaign after they visit a campaign page, or they attend an event and you kick off a multi-channel campaign that actually sends them an email. It makes a note on Jane, the major gift officer's calendar, to call that donor. It actually sends them a physical mail piece and offers them the opportunity to send in a check to that program. So there's a lot of different ways that you can create these dynamic campaigns that are running all the time, that are responding or related to donor signals that you're hearing. And Virtuous lets you do this in a very complex way, but also simple ways. So for example, if you have a donor that comes in that's given to a certain program and has a specific wealth score, you might want to send them a certain type of campaign. Whereas if they're a donor that's giving you $100, but they have wealth capacity, you might want to say, instead of sending them this normal campaign package that's personalized on their giving activity, we're actually going to have Jane in development call this donor and just listen to why they're supporting our organization the way they are, and ask and make suggestions on how they can get deeper involved. So that type of segmentation, because you're listening, is really a huge part of this. And you can use technology like Virtuous and others like Journity to be able to do this really well. So targeting donors on a one-to-one level actually increases response rates up to 50%. So I know a lot of people that hear us talk about this are like, well, that's a lot of work. And what we find though is that the work and the effort actually pays huge dividends than just neglecting this type of personalization. The third thing is that you want to provide contextual suggestions. So obviously brands like Netflix, Amazon, Disney are all listening closely to behaviors and preferences so they can make personalized, relevant, timely, and appropriate suggestions. And you should too. And so this is just making sure that when you present an action to a supporter, it makes sense based on where they're at in their donor journey. And again, tools like Journity, Virtuous, and just kind of practical listening and identifying that each individual is a different person and has different involvement, interest, and intent is going to help you make the right suggestions. And suggestions don't always mean to make a gift. It could be to watch a video, it could be to read a story, it could be to invite friends to watch a video, it could be to attend a webinar like this from your organization, where you're actually talking about how the work's getting done. And again, inviting them to be a part of the work rather than just giving to it. And so local organizations can invite people in and do tours. International or global organizations that are more distant from their donors can leverage technology to be able to create more intimacy and connection with the organization, but also with other like-minded individuals. You can also use things like peer-to-peer, and obviously making suggestions to give, but not just generic, but actually based on their giving capacity and potentially based on their intent or their interest. And the challenge here is that what we find is that organizations who attempt to do personalization but do it poorly are actually losing the trust of their consumers. And so being very intentional about how you're listening and what tools you're leveraging to be able to index all of that information is really important, because personalization can also have a downside. And I want to use this moment to also talk about that personalization doesn't, or technology doesn't replace human connection. And so personalization is both enabled through human connection, so like phone calls, but it's telling people who the right people are to call, or telling your emails to be sent to the right people at the right time. So technology and humans together can actually provide an extremely personalized experience that still maintains that level of connection and continues to build confidence. So the fourth one, which I kind of already talked about, is you want to be human in your messaging. Responsive fundraising requires and acknowledges that giving is deeply personal, and people are giving to people to come together to make a change in our world that they care about. And so with trusted institutions continuing to decline, the knowledge that giving is deeply personal, it's important to bring a humanness to your fundraising. And this can be as simple as sending emails from real people to a donor. And even though you're sending the email to 150 or 12,000 people, writing the email as though you're talking one to one because it's being read by one person at one time is a great way to start this. Also, writing like you talk, like not necessarily producing these full customized design pieces when you send email, or even when you send mail pieces or make phone calls with scripts. All of those are a result of us trying to take an old fundraising methodology and actually infuse it into these channels that are, if you think about it, when I receive something in the mail that's from somebody, I'm more likely to engage with that because it feels human. If I receive an email from Josh, it's coming from Josh. He's sending it to me. He's saying, "Hey, Noah, I see you. I'm trying to tell you something." And I'm more likely to listen. Same with a phone call. And so ensuring that you have a humanness in all of your communication through a variety of channels is, again, a huge part of the responsive fundraising process. And the other thing here is even getting others involved in fundraising that are outside of the fundraising kind of team. So I know in my organization, we had a all staff meeting once a month that was for an hour, where we just had all staff just call donors or write thank you notes, because we wanted to reinforce that donors were a key part of the work that we did, but B, we wanted our other staff to be able to connect personally with some of our donors in a way that they could bridge that level of connection. Because again, it's people coming together with other people to make a change in our world. An organization is just a platform to be able to accomplish and to facilitate that. And we've seen this work. Next After is an optimization group that does some incredible research, and they've shown that this isn't just the right thing to do. It's actually something that increases results, where a personal communication can actually increase the level of giving and engagement extremely significantly. And this plays out across a lot of different channels, and something that should be taken into consideration as you're looking for ways to use responsive fundraising within your organization. So again, we've talked about the why. We've built the foundation that helps us understand that, wow, there's like a collision of changing expectations of donors, declining number of donors actually giving to charities, a traditional fundraising model that is fundamentally designed for a donor that doesn't exist. And that foundation invites us to rethink how we could approach fundraising based on key insights that donors keep giving when they feel confident and they have a connection. They stop giving when they feel like a lack of trust, which is lack of confidence, or they don't feel connected to the cause or don't feel like the cause needs them. So responsive fundraising is really a response to that. And it's centered on the donor, focusing on listening for those donor signals and ensuring that you're connecting personally, and then making suggestions and then repeating the cycle. This isn't like a stewardship map or a donor mountain or a donor pyramid. This is very much focused on an approach and a posture towards donors that enables you to have a more authentic relationship. And ultimately, what we see here at Virtuous, build more lasting relationships with today's donor. So I want to invite more questions. I know we talked about a lot, and many of you have already shown interest in the fact that you want to dive into this book, which is encouraging to us. This is just scratching the surface of some of the work that we've done over the past 6 to 7 months on this. And so we're excited to share that book with you next month. In addition, as you guys are thinking through some questions, I'd love to send you a resource pack. And I'm trying to make it as easy as possible for you. So if you just send an email to noahb@virtuouscrm.com with the subject line Journey Webinar, I'll send you a 50-page blueprint and playbook that we've developed. So this was kind of a seed document that helped us write the book, or helped Gabe write the book. And then a 30-minute video really showcasing kind of why and the how of responsive fundraising, really kind of similar to this presentation. And then we actually did a summit for responsive nonprofits, and I'll send you all the videos to that. So just shoot me a simple email, subject line Journey Webinar, and I'll send you the whole resource pack after today's presentation. Josh, I'm going to kick it back over to you for Q&A.
Sounds great. Thanks so much, Noah. That was a lot of great information, and I will encourage everybody to sign up for that playbook. I know that I was able to catch the responsive summit live, and all the sessions were great. So I'm certain that the other resources have some additional exciting things as well. So thank you so much for sharing. I did actually have a couple questions. I really like the idea of sending out the survey to get the motivations, and I was just wondering what kind of response rate you guys typically get from a survey like that.
Yeah, so I think the key point here is not necessarily focused on a singular tactic, like, oh, we should send a survey right now, but rather infusing this collection process into various activities that you already do. So one thing that we've seen practically to increase the amount of data you can get so that you can serve your donors is that when a donor gives on your website, for example, like immediately ask them, like capitalize on that momentum so that you can, ask them to engage. Or leveraging a tool even like Journity, you could actually expose them to an offer that says, hey, we know that you're a valued donor and you're getting a lot of resources or value from the resources we provide. Why is this important to you? And so I think it's less about a singular like initiative, like sending out a survey, but it's actually infusing kind of the intent collection process or just that idea of listening for donor signals into your overall fundraising strategy. To answer your original question, I've only done this once with an organization specifically, but we saw a huge response rate when we kept it extremely simple. We didn't over engineer the survey. We said, hey, why do you give to this organization, specifically to this program? What can we do to help and make it better? And would you recommend giving to this program to someone else? We asked 3 open-ended questions. We sent it to, I think, 9,000 people, and we had over 1,000 people respond. And it was incredible to see the amount of data we were able to collect. And we actually began doing that every 4 months to a different segment of the donor base. So we basically rotated so that every 12 months we were asking the same, or no, I'm sorry, we did it every 3 months. So every 9 months we were asking donors for additional feedback and then monitoring changes within that sentiment. So again, the level of sophistication can be different, but we felt like it wasn't hey, let's do a survey, but it was like, how do we actually instill this listening into our strategy?
Fantastic. I like that. And I like what you said specifically about making it almost a standard operating procedure, right? Because
Absolutely.
that lends to the mindset of your organization becoming responsive. So that's fantastic. Thanks so much. I am not seeing any other questions come through, so I think we can wrap this up.
And
And
give a minute back to everybody so they
yeah,
can send us survey.
you all can enjoy, or you can spend that minute thinking of additional questions and send them into Noah, and I'm sure he'll respond. And then also definitely recommend requesting the responsive fundraising playbook and other resources. Thanks so
Awesome.
much. Really appreciate the time, Noah, and I really appreciate all of you for coming out. I hope you learned something.
Yeah, great. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.